So we have an opportunity to come together today and do our white stone ceremony. You may be wondering why I would say come together, but one of the beautiful things about presence, and already there's a great deal of presence in the room, is that presence knows no distance. And so as we come to be present to the service, present to ourselves, there's a field of presence that rises between us. And that field is incredibly supportive. The activity of Spirit is always working to bring forth the truth, to bring us to greater and greater consciousness. And that's the invitation of this white stone ceremony. Just to give you a little bit of history, the ceremony was, or the history of the white stone really started in the time of Jesus. At that time, if you'd been put in prison or somehow were in bondage and released, they handed you a white stone. And the white stone symbolized a new beginning, that this was an opportunity for you to change your ways, to step up into a higher level of consciousness, to live from a different perspective. And in that way, not to return to bondage, to truly be free. We're all in bondage. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, I'll help you acknowledge it this morning, that we all have beliefs that we have taken on that limit us. That's the bondage that we live from. And the white stone is inviting us to transcend those beliefs. And then the book of Revelation adds another little element or another little twist. Here's what it says. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone, which no one knows except him who receives it. This is really a message of support, of the support of Spirit in our life. First of all, when it says that him who, let's see, how does it start out? Let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The churches are those that are open to the activity of Spirit. So those of us individuals who are curious about Spirit in our lives. And then it says, I'll give you some manna. If you know the Bible at all, when the Israelites were leaving Egypt, there was not enough food. And so in the mornings, there was a dew that formed a wafer-like substance that nourished the people, allowed them to make this journey out of Egypt, which was a place of bondage, to a place of freedom. And so one way to look at it is it saying that those that can see beyond appearance, I will give all that is needed for you to live. There will be a never-ceasing flow of manifest good in your life. And then again, we're introduced to the white stone, an opportunity, right, to be free of that which has limited us. But here it adds a new name. A name in the Bible represents a change in consciousness. And for our purposes today, it could be that. The name could be to remind you that in truth, you have already achieved some level of consciousness. But my own personal experience is that the name is inviting me to step up. Inviting me to level up, if you will. It becomes a focus, a guide for the next 12 months. And so, if you happen to have a white stone, maybe you stopped by Columbine and picked up one. If you didn't, I would invite you to still do that. We have lots by our front door. Some, as we were laughing about a little earlier, more like white boulders, but you can take whatever you need for your remembrance. But remember, these are all symbolic. What's important is if the name comes to you during the service, and remember that the invitation is for it to come from spirit, to come from some quiet, mysterious place, to write it down, because it's easy to forget, and to place it somewhere where it's well seen this year. I always like to use some kind of inspiration as we explore our name. And so this year we're going to finish up our series on the road to Bethlehem. We've been looking at how the story of the birth of Jesus really mimics the stages that we go through spiritually. And let's just see where we are in the story. Jesus has been born, and Mary and Joseph decided to take a house in Bethlehem. And about a month after Jesus had been born, Gabriel informs Joseph in a dream that Herod, who is the king, is going to try and kill Jesus, and that they need to escape. And so immediately they leave for Egypt. And they live there for a year. About a year later, Herod dies, and once again, Gabriel appears to Joseph and tells him that it's safe to return to Israel. But Joseph hears that Herod has been replaced by his son. So instead of moving to Jerusalem, which is sort of the center of activity of Israel, they move back. I want to say to Galilee. They move back to Nazareth, which is the town that they're from. So isn't it interesting? We've made a full circle. We're moving back to Nazareth in this part of the story. But I'd like to go back and visit Egypt just a little bit. Last week, Sue did a beautiful job of really highlighting the fact that often life can become challenging, and that Egypt represents a familiar, safe place, often a place that we know through our own patterning, that it can represent a place that we're used to living out of, maybe is the way. But I want to add a little bit more to the understanding of Egypt. And we're going to go back to the book of Genesis, where you may remember that the Israelites were experiencing a drought. And a drought has an interesting connotation to it. A drought tends to exhaust our inner resources. And this is interesting, that if we live purely out of our ego, do you know the experience of letting yourself be pushed and prodded by your ego to be really working to achieve something that your ego says you need, which can come from our families, can come from our cultures, but we internalize it. And we try and live from it. There's a lot of efforting in it, a lot of judgment, a lot of comparative judgment. It's hard to really relax. And after a while, it gets to us. I remember, we don't talk about it so much, but I remember when we used to talk about midlife crisis. It was usually that point where we started to break down. We started to ask ourselves, isn't there more? And so the Israelites are experiencing this drought. And the drought, by the way, is the whole region, including Egypt. But in Egypt, they've learned how to work with water efficiently. And they've learned how to stockpile their grains and to ration them out so that there is enough for everyone. And so Egypt represents a kind of nourishing and a place to rest, a place to regenerate. But there's a cost in going to Egypt. For you see, the Israelites go there, they're welcomed in, but they became the servants of the Egyptians. They're in bondage. And yet there's a lull to being taken care of. Most people have some longing to be taken care of. They expect God to take care of them. They expect a government to take care of them, or their partner to take care of them, or their family to take care of them. And we compromise ourselves out of that. And the desire to be comfortable, to be taken care of, can be so strong that we forget. But you see, Egypt also offers us so much more. For example, remember the power associated with Egypt is zeal. Zeal has so much curiosity in it, it's so much light and so much energy in it that it helps us to remember. And also there was right action in Egypt, right? They had figured out how to live through a drought. They were nourished. They were vibrant people in the midst of the world, which was full of pulls and pushes. And so while things are tough for a lot of people right now, you don't want to lose yourself in Egypt. This is the power of Joseph. Joseph is the intellect. And remember John the Baptist, we called him the illumined intellect, but I want to say to you, I think Joseph is also an illustration of the illumined intellect, because as we understand spirituality, as we study it, as we pause to reflect on our own life and how Spirit has been that supportive flow through our own life, that is the illumined intellect that says, no, we do not want to settle here. We have an opportunity to grow. And it's interesting, Pharaoh, remember there's a Pharaoh of Egypt, and Pharaoh doesn't want to let the Israelites go. And the only way they can go is when they're willing to sacrifice the ties that bind them to the past. Those of you that know me knew I about wet my pants when I read that. Because, see, I think that is the key. Most people come to me and say, why don't you talk about what God is more? Because, folks, God is alive and well in each one of us. It is our belief system that covers it up. And in order to leave Egypt, we need to be willing to explore what is in the way. What is it that's going on for us? What is it that makes us want to live in the comfort, to be taken care of, versus to live out loud, as we've been talking about as a staff, to want to really just live in the flow, just to be open to whatever life is offering us and to say yes to that. When we're willing, what happens is Herod doesn't actually die. I think it was beautiful that they have Herod replaced by his son, but Herod becomes a lot less demanding, at least in my experience. Herod begins to soften and in fact begins to dissolve. And the representation of a father going to a son is a little bit gentler, a little bit less intense. And it's interesting, Hypatia Hasbrook wrote the book that we're working off of, and she says something that, again, I can't quite relate to. She says that the ego hangs out in our place of inner peace, which is Jerusalem. What I would say to you is the ego is really good at convincing you that you are in inner peace. You know that funny joke where somebody lands in hell and Satan says, this isn't hell and it's not hot? Well, the ego also is, Satan represents our ego also. And the ego is always trying to convince you that where you're at is just fine, or that it could never be better. And so very astutely, this illumined intellect of Joseph says, let's not go there. Let's go to Nazareth. Now, the Bible says nothing good can come out of Nazareth. And I must admit, that was sort of my experience too. I thought that living a God-filled life would be juicy and zesty and full of all sorts of treats, let's say. But as if I have continued to do my work, initially, what I found was just a lot of quiet stillness. It really brought up Herod in me. What the hell? This is not what we signed up for. Where's the juice? We're ready to really have some fun here. But I wasn't understanding. Nazareth is a rocky area that is always arid. There is very little plant life there, very little water, and it's hot. And the people tend to be sort of salt of the earth. There's just a basicness. I want to say they live a simple life. And as we make room for the emergence of the Christ, as that being what we live from, what we find out is that Spirit is actually quiet. Not complicated. Relaxed. At ease. Ready to jump into whatever action, whatever expression is needed. It can be quite exciting. But when not needed, still, open, transparent. Nobody. You feel like a nobody because you're so used to all the hoopla, all the drama, all the pushing, all the needing. The quality here is life. It seems contradictory. But when you sense into the life force in each one of us, it's open, it's dynamic, it's available. It can't be disturbed or hurt. And as Charles Fillmore says, the life, the power of life, it activates and enrolls all the other powers. And because it has a dynamicness to it, it tends to reveal yet anywhere where we still need to go back to Egypt and work. So it's a healing energy also. It wants to bring us to full healing. And this place of Nazareth is pure potential because you see there's nothing in the way. No strong beliefs about who you are or what you can and can't do or what the world is. You're just open. It's a blank slate. It's really a place to not only develop our souls, to embody more capacity for trusting and holding the Christ, being the Christ, but also in us developing our capacity to trust that we really respond in exactly the way that's needed. We may be returning to Nazareth, but it is not the Nazareth we knew. And as you get used to it, it becomes rich. Home. Yeah, I hadn't realized. I don't think I've ever used that word home before. But it really speaks to what Nazareth becomes. And so let's come back to the white stone. The name that we get will not be Billy or Sue, but instead a name that, as I said, either embodies some leveling up of consciousness that's happening, or an invitation to explore, to be on the path so that leveling up can happen. For example, my name this last year was practice. And at first, I didn't understand. You see, my ego had me fooled that my practice was just fine. But as I reflected on the word and allowed the illumination of the word to come through my consciousness, I realized that living quite a distance from the church and coming to the church twice a week, I wasn't practicing on those days. Leaving early in the morning. There were 2 out of the 7 days that I wasn't doing my spiritual practice. And so, great. You beat a lot of traffic, you had to leave early, so I said, starting when I arrive at the church, I'm going to do 20 to 30 minutes of practice. And by the way, I put my stone on my desk as my reminder. Worst 20 or 30 minutes of my life. And I was like, what's the deal? It's not that every day of meditation for me is wonderful. Some of them are like I've never meditated before. And so I started to be curious. I went into Egypt and allowed zeal to illumine, allowed all the powers to work through me, and found a huge amount of issues around wanting to be seen, wanting to be valued, wanting to be loved. I mean, that's the place. That's where we do our work. Part of life is awareness. That's part of how they describe the power of life, that it brings awareness. And after I'd done my inquiry into why, because you see, my ego would have been just fine with me struggling. Didn't really want me to learn anything more about myself. Really wanted me to stay in Egypt. Just stay there. Just struggle. It's fine. But with awareness, I was able to enter into the meditation with compassion for a part of myself that wanted to get right to work, because it was through doing that I was somebody. I was able to talk to that part, reassure it, tell it, it's okay, we'll get all the work done, you'll get all the work done. You can have at it, but let's rest. Let's rest for a few minutes. It's like we were in kindergarten again. Remember, you had to lay down on a mat and take a little rest? I just want to say one other thing before I invite Lydia Folger to come up and lead you through a meditation. I've been raised in unity, and the whole idea of affirmative prayer, of speaking in the affirmative, caused me to take the word, the name that I was given, and to modify it to some goal. So I was trying to think today, what would be a good one for practice? I might have said dedicated practicer was my new name, It took me years, but I'll tell you what, when I made it into something, boy, did my Herod have a heyday with it. If I missed a day of practice, for example, you scumbag, see, you might as well resign now. You are not spiritual, it was just the focus of comparative judgment, of critical judgment, of then collapse, and then wanting to forget the name altogether. That name was stupid anyway. When I just let it be practice, it's just a reminder of what I'm to do. A few years ago, I got Speak Your Truth. It's just a reminder. This will level you up. Spirit never gives up on us. And our willingness to be open to a new name today, Spirit is inviting us on the road to Bethlehem, to the birth of the Christ. And so I'm going to turn you over to good hands right now, to Lydia Folger, who's going to invite you into the silence.